If you just look at a map, Louisiana should be one of the most powerful, wealthiest states in America. I mean, it sits right at the mouth of the Mississippi River, which is basically North America's single most important economic highway. It should be the New York of the South, right? But instead, it's a state with land that's literally sinking, growth that's stalled out, and a river that's desperately trying to pack up and leave.
So that's the big question we're digging into today. How did a place that won the geographic lottery end up in this situation? It's a mystery, and to solve it, we need to look at the geology, the history, and the politics that all came together to create the Louisiana paradox.
And this slide just lays out the paradox so clearly. On one side, you have this incredible promise, this unmatched strategic position. But the reality? Well, it's a story of crisis. The land itself is disappearing, the economy is falling behind, and even the state's most famous feature, the river, wants out. The gap between what should be and what is, it's just staggering. Okay, so to really understand this, we have to start from the ground up, literally. The first piece of the puzzle isn't about economics or politics, it's about the very land Louisiana is built on. It's a story about unstable ground and the restless river that created it. Now, think about this for a second. The southern half of Louisiana isn't land in the way you might think of land. It wasn't pushed up by tectonic plates. It's more like a massive 7,000-year-old construction project built almost entirely by the Mississippi River dropping off mud. And here's how that works. The process is actually pretty simple. The Mississippi River acts like this giant conveyor belt, carrying silt and sand from the middle of the continent all the way down to the coast. When it hits the calm waters of the Gulf, it slows down and just drops everything it's carrying. For thousands of years, that sediment piled up, layer after layer, until it finally broke the surface and created land. So here's the kicker. What is this land actually made of? It's not solid rock. It's basically a giant, wet sponge. There are thousands of feet of muck, and if you dig a hole just about anywhere in New Orleans, it fills with water almost immediately. So, trying to build anything, a city, a highway, a refinery, is incredibly difficult. And it gets even more complicated. You see, the river that built this land is, well, it's alive. It's always changing. And after a while, it gets bored. The path it carved out becomes too long, too slow. It starts looking for a shortcut to the sea. And right now, the river has found that shortcut. It desperately wants to jump its banks and flow down the Atchafalaya River instead. And you can see why. It's 150 miles shorter and way steeper. If we just let nature take its course, New Orleans and Baton Rouge would basically become saltwater inlets overnight. So, to stop that from happening, we've essentially taken the river hostage. We built this massive feat of engineering called the Old River Control Structure. Its only job is to force about 70% of the Mississippi's water to stay on its current path, protecting the state's two biggest cities. It might just be the most important piece of infrastructure in America that you've never heard of. So we've established this incredibly shaky, natural foundation. Now let's talk about the society that humans decided to build right on top of it. Because the story of Louisiana has always been a story of extraction. You know, for centuries, Louisiana wasn't really a place to live. It was a strategic asset to be controlled, a chess piece. As you can see, it was passed between empires, France, Spain, and finally the US. Everybody wanted to control the mouth of the Mississippi, because that meant you controlled the back door to the entire continent. The French founded New Orleans back in 1718. It was a brilliant move strategically, but a truly awful place to actually live. It was swampy, prone to constant flooding, and diseases like yellow fever and malaria ran rampant. They called it the wet grave. The only reason the city survived was because of the forced labor of enslaved Africans who were made to build the levees and drain the swamps. But somehow, against all odds, by the 1800s, New Orleans had become the wealthiest city in America. But let's be very clear about where that wealth came from. The entire economy was built on a rotting foundation, harvesting cotton and sugar with enslaved labor. New Orleans was, in fact, the largest slave market in the entire country. And then the Civil War came, and that whole foundation just crumbled. When slavery was abolished, the state's economic model was completely destroyed. The wealth vanished, and Louisiana plunged into more than a century of deep poverty and corruption. And that brings us to the modern era. This is where two massive forces really came to define Louisiana's destiny. The first was a populist politician they called the Kingfish. The second was the discovery of oil, which seemed like a blessing but turned out to be a curse. And this chart really shows you the result of that modern history. I mean, look at this. While its neighbors like Texas and Florida are absolutely booming, adding almost 1 million people each, Louisiana is actually shrinking. It's lost 40,000 people just in the last few years. So what happened? Well, in modern Louisiana, all roads lead back to one person, Huey P. Long. He was this larger-than-life figure who took over in the 1930s, and his legacy is completely split. On one hand, he was a savior to the poor. He built roads, bridges, and hospitals. But on the other hand, he was a dictator who basically destroyed democracy in the state, using bribes and threats to get whatever he wanted. He created a culture of corruption that haunted Louisiana for decades. At the very same time, massive oil fields were discovered. And you'd think, great, problem solved. But it turned into what economists call the resource curse. See, when you have one thing that makes a ton of easy money, like oil, you often forget to build anything else. Louisiana got hooked on oil revenue.
And these are the consequences of that addiction. The state never really had to build a diverse, modern economy. The oil money kept flowing, but it came at a huge cost, creating the infamous Cancer Alley, a polluted industrial corridor with terrible health outcomes. And all of this has led to a massive brain drain. Smart, educated young people leave for better opportunities and a better quality of life elsewhere.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. You have a state built on land that wants to be water, anchored by a river that wants to be somewhere else, and governed for decades by a political system focused on short-term gain. It's the perfect storm that created the Louisiana we see today.
And this is the stark reality of the situation. This number is just mind-blowing. Louisiana loses a football field's worth of land to the ocean every 100 minutes. The state is literally washing away.
But here's the final twist in the story. For all of its problems, Louisiana plays a hugely important role for the rest of the United States. Its wetlands act like a shield, absorbing the power of hurricanes. It processes the oil and gas that powers our cars and homes. And it drains all the water from the heartland of America. It's a funnel and a shield for the whole country. And that brings us to this really powerful and frankly, kind of tragic conclusion. Maybe Louisiana's problems aren't entirely its own fault. Maybe, in many ways, Louisiana didn't fail. It was sacrificed, bearing the burden and the environmental costs for the benefit of the entire nation. Which leaves us with this one profound final question. What is the future for a state built on land that doesn't want to be land, held in place by a river that doesn't want to be there? There's no easy answer, and that existential question is the challenge Louisiana faces every single day.